There was a box of matches on the shelf above the stove, and by that September I could find it in the black without ever setting my hand wrong, which is how I found it every morning of that harvest. I was 23 years old, and it was my second harvest as a married woman. The window over the wash basin was still nothing but dark glass, with my own small reflection standing in it. No gray in the east yet, no wagon on the road, no boots on the porch stairs. The stove took a good while to come up, and the coffee longer than that, and the field hands would want their pails packed before the horn went. So I struck the match and touched it to the wick, and stood there a moment while the kitchen came up out of the dark one shelf at a time. In our house, the kitchen was lit before the men were even awake to need it. And I could not have told you who decided that. Only that it was always me, and that it had been starting earlier every year, and that nobody had ever once asked me for it out loud. I was married in November, the way most of us were, after the corn was in and the district had time for a wedding, and my first harvest as a wife came the following autumn. Before that, I had been a girl in my mother's kitchen, and a girl's work has an end to it somewhere. A wife's did not, and I learned that the way I learned most things, which is to say by watching, because nobody sat me down and told me. What I was told, once, was a saying. It came from my mother-in-law, kindly, over a bowl of green beans we were snapping for canning, and it was this. A good wife's kitchen is lit before the men's boots hit the porch stairs. She said it the way you'd say that rain comes from the west. Not a rule out of the ordnung, not anything the bishop had ever preached from, not a thing written in any book that was read aloud in the G-May. Just a saying, handed down, the way a recipe is handed down, worn so smooth by all the mouths it had passed through that it did not occur to anyone to turn it over and look at the underside. So that first harvest, I set my rising by it. I got up at 5, and I lit the lamp, and I had the stove hot, and the coffee going, and the eggs ready when my husband came down, and he thanked me, and he meant it. I folded that hour into being a wife the same way I had folded in the bread and the wash and the garden, without any weighing of it, without any sense that it was a thing being taken rather than a thing being given. There were 16 at our table when the threshing crew came through, and I was proud of that. I had 8 years of schooling and a strong back and a kitchen of my own, and I thought pride was the whole of what I was feeling. I did not have a word for it yet. The trouble with a saying is that it has no number in it. It does not say 5 o'clock. It says before, and before has no floor to it, and a woman will keep lowering herself toward that floor for years without ever hitting it. My second harvest, the crew was bigger, because my husband had taken on more acres and 2 more hired hands, young fellows from the next district who slept in the shop and ate like the threshing itself. 5 o'clock stopped being enough, so it became 4:30, and it became 4:30 without one word passing between me and anybody, without a discussion, without so much as a look. I simply moved the hour back the way you move a chair to make room at the table, and I did not tell my husband I had done it, and he did not notice that it had been done, because from where he sat, the kitchen was always simply lit. That is the thing about being the one who lights it. Nobody ever sees the dark part, and it was not only our house. At the threshing bees, when we wives were carrying platters out and refilling the water jugs, and standing back against the wall waiting to carry them in again, there was a kind of talk that went along the wall in low voices, half in Pennsylvania Dutch, and it was always the same shape. Well, I had the pies in by 4. Well, I don't hardly go to bed at all this time of year. And we laughed when we said it, we truly did, the way you laugh at weather you cannot do anything about. But underneath the laughing, there was a scoring, and every one of us knew the score, and every one of us knew that the woman whose lamp was lit first was the best wife on that road, not the kindest, not the most patient with her children, the earliest. I went home from those bees and set my rising back another 10 minutes. I did not have a word for what that was either. The morning it broke open on me, nothing dramatic happened at all. I overslept by 10 minutes. That is the whole of it. I had been up twice in the night with a sick calf my husband was worried over, and I laid back down, and when I opened my eyes, the clock said 20 to 5 and the kitchen was still black. 10 minutes. And I want you to understand what went through me, because it was not annoyance, it was not tiredness. It was shame, hot as a stove lid, all the way up my neck. I came down that stairway with my cap strings not even tied, my hands going before my mind was awake, and I got the lamp lit and the fire going, and nothing that morning ran late by so much as a minute. Nobody said one cross word to me. My husband did not say a word to me, because there was nothing for him to say. From where he stood, that morning looked exactly like every other morning of his life. And that is when I sat down on the step outside the wash house in the dark with my hands shaking and did the arithmetic. 1 hour a morning, 6 mornings a week, because the Lord's Day was different, but never much lighter. 6 or 7 weeks of harvest. 2 harvests behind me, and no reason at all to think there was a floor coming. And I could not make the numbers mean anything except that there was a piece of my own life, a real piece, hours of it, that I had been handing across the table every single morning, and no one on either side of that table had ever counted it. If you are listening to this and you know the feeling I am describing, the one where you cannot say what is wrong because nothing is wrong, I hope you will stay with me to the end of it, and I hope you will subscribe so I know somebody is out there. And if you have a kitchen like that, or you had one once, tell me in the comments what hour you get up. I have wanted to know that about other women my whole life, and never once had a way to ask. I could not take it to my husband. Not because he would have been hard with me, he would not have been, but because I had no charge to lay. What would I have said? That he had let me do a thing I had never told him was heavy? So I took it to Fanny, his aunt, who lived out the road 1.5 miles toward the mill, and who had fed the biggest harvest crew in our district for 30 years running. If there was a woman on that road who had earned the right to tell me I was soft, it was Fanny. Her lamp had been lit before mine was born. I hitched the buggy on a Tuesday afternoon in the middle of harvest, which by itself tells you something, because a woman does not leave her kitchen in the middle of harvest for no reason, and I drove out there with the whole way rehearsing how I would say it, so it would not sound like complaining. I settled on this. I wanted to ask her how she managed the early mornings. That was all. I would ask her a housekeeping question, like a girl asking after a recipe, and I would take whatever she told me, and I was almost certain what she would tell me. She would tell me 4 o'clock. She would tell me that when the crew is that size, you get up at 4, and you thank the Lord for the strength to do it, and you do not sit around on washhouse steps counting your own hours like a hired man counting his wages. I had already decided to obey her. I had the new hour picked out in my head before I ever got there. And Fanny came out on her porch when she heard the buggy and looked at me, and I had not said one syllable yet, and she took my hand and brought me inside and sat me down at her own table in the middle of a workday, and instead of asking me what I had come for, she poured me a cup of coffee and set it down in front of me and pulled her chair around to my side. I started in on my little rehearsed question, and I did not get through it. I said I was having trouble with the mornings, and I said the crew was bigger this year, and I said I had gotten to where I was up at 4:30, and I said it almost like an apology, like I was confessing that 4:30 was late. And Fanny let me get that far, and then she put her hand flat on the table, not hard, and she asked me the question I have carried in my chest every harvest since. She said, "Child, who lit your lamp all these mornings you have been lighting everyone else's?" I did not have an answer. I sat in her kitchen with my mouth open like a girl in school, and she did not fill the quiet for me. She let it sit there and get heavy, because she knew there was no answer, because the answer was nobody, and had been nobody, for 2 years. And then she told me what she had not told the young wives, and what nobody had told her either until she was near 40. She said that bread dough will rise overnight in a cold pantry and be the better for it. She said coffee can be measured into the pot the night before, and the pails packed and covered with a cloth, and the table set, and the stove laid ready to the match, and every bit of that costs you nothing in the dark because you are standing there in the dark anyway before you go up to bed. She said she had lost near 10 years of mornings before it ever occurred to her that the harvest did not need her awake at 4. The harvest needed the food on the table at 6. And those are not the same thing. And no one in that house had ever been made to tell the difference, because the difference came out of her sleep and not out of anybody else's. It was not the Ordnung. The bishop had never once preached that a wife must rise before her husband. I could not have found it in Scripture if I had hunted for a year. It was a habit of a house. That is all it ever was. A habit that had been passed woman to woman down that road until it wore the shape of a commandment, and the whole of what it taught was that a wife's own rest is the last thing in the house to be counted, and the first thing to be spent. Nothing loud happened after that. I want to be honest about it, because I think women expect these stories to end with a door slammed, and mine ends with a pantry. I drove home, and that night, after supper, while the men were out at the shop, I set my kitchen the way Fanny showed me. I mixed the dough and covered it and set it in the cold corner. I measured the coffee into the pot. I packed the field hands' pails and laid a damp cloth over them, and I set the table for the morning, and I laid the fire ready to the match. It took me maybe 20 minutes standing up, at an hour when I was standing up anyway. And then I went upstairs and I set the clock for 5:15, and I laid in the dark a long while with my heart going like I had stolen something. In the morning, the kitchen was lit at 5:30 and breakfast was on the table at 6, the same as it had ever been, and not one soul in that house knew the difference. That is what took me the longest to forgive, not that I had been made to do it, but that it had never mattered to anyone but me. I got back the better part of an hour every morning of that harvest, and I never told my husband where it came from. But he is not a stupid man, and he is a good one. Sometime in the second week, he started looking at me over his coffee like he was working out a sum. And then there came a gray morning near the end of threshing when I came down the stairs, and the lamp on the kitchen shelf was already burning, and the stove was already ticking, and he was standing at the window with his back to me and his suspenders not yet up. He never said one word about it, not that morning, not ever. He struck it himself, and he let me sleep those last minutes, and I stood on the bottom stair and cried where he could not see me. I am older now, and I have watched young wives come into this district and start doing the same arithmetic on themselves that I did, moving the hour back and calling it faithfulness. So here is what I would say to you if you were sitting at my table with a cup in front of you. Your own rest was never meant to be the last thing counted in your own kitchen. Tending a home is holy work, and I have never once believed otherwise, but tending a home does not mean disappearing into its hours before anybody is even awake to see you go. There is a difference between what the work truly needs and what a house has simply always done, and a great deal of what wears women out lives in that gap. It is worth asking which one you are up at 4 o'clock for. And now let me say the most important part plainly, with all the respect I have in me, because I would hate for one word of this to be heard wrong. My husband was not a villain in this story. He is a kind man, and a patient one, and he worked himself harder in those fields than he ever asked me to work in that kitchen. He simply inherited a morning that was already lit, and he had no more reason to question it than I had reason to question that saying about the boots on the porch stairs. And our people are not villains either. I am Amish, and I chose this life, and I would choose it again tomorrow. Our community fed me when I was sick, raised my barn in a day, sat with me when I buried my mother, and there is a goodness in our way of living that the world outside does not often get to see. I am not telling you this to shame the Amish, or my church, or my husband, or my mother-in-law, who loved me and only handed down what had been handed to her. Nobody in that house was wicked. It was only an arrangement that had never been said out loud, And things that are never said out loud have a way of costing whoever is quietest. I was the quietest for 2 harvests. I am not anymore. For a long time, I could not name the thing that was taking pieces out of me in the dark. I have a word for it now. I wrote it all down, eventually. The mornings, the arithmetic on the wash-house step, Fanny's kitchen, the gray morning he struck the lamp himself, everything I could never have said out loud on that road. I put it together as a small book, and the link to it is in the description below, and in the first pinned comment too, if you want the rest of it. And if you don't, that is all right. Sit a while longer, subscribe if you'd like me to come back, and tell me in the comments what hour you rise. Thank you for keeping me company this morning, whatever hour it is where you are. Go easy on yourself today.